The telegram arrived on a Tuesday, which Elias Harmon always said was the unluckiest day of the week. 4 envelopes, 4 names, 4 women traveling west on the same train. He and his brothers had laughed about it over supper the night before. 4 bachelors, 1 farm. One ridiculous idea that their neighbor Gerald had convinced them would solve the loneliness that winter had pressed so deeply into their bones. The youngest brother, Thomas, was the first to spot them. 4 women stepping off the train in a quiet line. They moved together the way people do when they have only each other, shoulders almost touching, eyes scanning the unfamiliar crowd with a careful kind of courage. Elias felt something shift in his chest before a single word was spoken. Their names were Rose, Clara, Vivian, and June, sisters, every one of them. The eldest, Rose with the blue ribbon, stepped forward and explained it plainly. Their father had died the previous spring. Their home in Vermont had been sold to cover his debts. They had pooled their responses to 4 separate advertisements because it was the only way to stay together. They were not asking for pity. They were asking for a chance. The brothers exchanged glances. Daniel, the second oldest, looked almost angry. Marcus, the third, looked at his boots. Thomas, only 22, looked at June, the youngest sister, and forgot entirely what his face was supposed to be doing. Elias said the only honest thing he could think of. He said they were welcome to stay while everyone figured out what came next. What came next was 3 weeks of careful, awkward distance that slowly became something else entirely. Rose cooked like she was feeding a small army and expected the kitchen to be respected. Clara read every book on the farmhouse shelf and left notes in the margins that Daniel found and read privately, his skepticism softening page by page. Vivian had a gift for fixing things, fences, harnesses. The old clock above the mantel that had unworked in 6 years, and Marcus began quietly following her around, handing her tools before she asked for them. And Thomas and June simply talked endlessly about everything and nothing, filling the cold evenings with laughter that the rest of them leaned toward like a fire. But it was Rose who broke first, and not in the way Elias expected. He found her one morning before dawn, sitting on the porch steps with a letter in her hand and tears she clearly hadn't meant anyone to see. The letter was from a man in Ohio who had also answered her advertisement, a wealthier man, one who offered a proper house in a proper town. She had written to him months ago, before the train, before this farm, before she understood what she was walking into. He didn't say she should stay, because he understood what it meant to want something solid after everything crumbled. He didn't say she should go because the word felt like a stone in his throat. He said that whatever she chose, her sisters would be cared for. And that was a promise he intended to keep regardless of what any arrangement looked like on paper. Rose folded the letter slowly. She said she had spent her whole life making decisions based on what was safe. She said safe had still left her on a train with everything she owned in a single bag. Then she looked at Elias with those steady, unreadable eyes and said that the only thing on this property that frightened her was how much she had already stopped wanting to leave. The wedding was held in December, all 4 of them on the same afternoon, and no one could argue with both of them at once. The snow came down in long, unhurried sheets. June wore yellow flowers in her hair even in winter because she said color was a form of courage. Marcus cried, which surprised everyone, including Marcus. There were hard years after, there always are. A drought in the second summer, a fever that took Thomas briefly and terrifyingly close to a place none of them wanted to follow. And the sound of the old clock above the mantel keeping faithful time, and 4 women who had arrived with a single bag each and somehow, quietly, filled every room. Elias would say in his later years that fate had a strange sense of humor, that 4 lonely men and 4 determined women had each been looking for something the other carried without knowing it, that the luckiest thing that ever happened to him arrived on a Tuesday, which he had always said was the unluckiest day of the week, and that maybe that was the whole point. Some gifts come disguised as uncertainty. You only recognize them after you've chosen to stay.